Aloha, good afternoon, and welcome to the second episode of Talk Story with House Majority. My name is Della Belatti, and I am the Majority Leader of the Hawaii House of Representatives. Since we last talked story, so much has happened. The Capitol has opened up. We've had hearings in person and virtual. We've had our budget pass over to the Senate. We've had the indoor mask mandate drop, as well as safe travels across the state. We had our first art at the Capitol in 2 years. And now, today, we are on the eve of the 48th day, yes, the 48th day of the legislative session. So much has happened and so much more is about to happen in the last 3 to 4 weeks of the legislature. Today, I have a very special guest. The focus of this episode is going to be about housing. And we're going to start off with one of the biggest initiatives, a historic landmark initiative with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Today I have with me Tyler Iokepa Gomes, Deputy to the Chair of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So I'm very excited. You've been with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands since?
2019, 3 years,
okay.
Almost 3 years.
And then in your role as Deputy to the Chair, what are some of the things that you find yourself doing on a day-to-day basis?
There's the normal stuff you'd expect from administering a state agency, and then there are unique things like as a result of the pandemic, the department was thrust into a lot of broadband money. Historically, the department was not known for broadband development, but now we have to. So there are all kinds of issues that pop up, and the more unusual they are, usually that's where I come in.
And one of those unusual opportunities was with this legislative session. As we were heading into this legislative session, legislative leadership on both the House and the Senate was looking at possibly, unsure economic times, but as the as the economy has recovered, we're seeing this boom in money. And so this has given us an opportunity to do something really, really important with Department of Hawaiian Homelands. And so I know, we put a big task on you and Chair Ila with figuring out how can we strategically invest $600 million in advancing the mission of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. So since opening day, tell me what's happened with that bill, and I believe it's House Bill 2511.
Right. Well, there's been a lot of excitement. I think, first of all, we're very grateful for both houses of the legislature being willing to explore this with us. So the bill started out as an idea. I think, like you said, people wanted to know, how do we make meaningful change? How do we address the wait list? How do we address affordable housing? And how do we do it in a creative way? And from that, the discussion really came around to what can you do with a couple $100 million? Mm-hmm. And the answer is not a lot, at least not in the scope of Hawaiian Homelands, right? We have a wait list of 28,000 Native Hawaiians who are waiting for an award. 600 million doesn't really go that far. It makes a dent, but it's not a lot of money. And I think getting into the weeds with our legislators and being able to look at, how far does a dollar really go? Mm-hmm. Especially in light of the pandemic, we've seen construction costs just blossom in the last couple of years, in the last few months alone. And so knowing that these processes take a lot of money, sort of managing expectations, but also being forced to think really, like I said, creatively has been the goal. So we put out all of our projects that we thought the money could fund. We put out some creative ideas, which I think people have heard about now, such as mortgage assistance or down payment assistance, in which we would offer someone the opportunity to provide up to $100,000 for a down payment on a fee simple house off of Hawaiian Homelands, or towards their mortgage, also in fee simple off of Hawaiian Homelands, with the ask that they remove themselves from the wait list. And that would do a couple of things. First, Hawaiian Homes doesn't provide fee simple interests for beneficiaries, right? And so the idea that we might be able to provide Native Hawaiians with very real, tangible, perpetual interests in land, that's huge, right? That really falls within the scope of rehabilitation, which is the whole purpose of the act in our department. But also, for those folks who are, just shy of being homeowners, for example, and could use a $100,000 step up in order to make that a reality, if we can help them off of the wait list and get them into homes, that means that the projects that we're already doing can move further down the wait list and ideally help more Native Hawaiians on the wait list.
Now, you were telling me earlier, this idea has been floated, it's being vetted in the legislature now. What's been the reaction amongst some beneficiaries about this opportunity for a down payment assistance?
I think the early reactions were surprise, maybe uncomfortability with the idea of what do you mean take my name off the wait list. It's been characterized as a buyout or a buy-off, but I think it's better characterized as a buyback. Because if we can help Native Hawaiians gain home ownership in a fee simple structure off of Hawaiian homelands, that's huge. Right now we're expanding the scope of what Native Hawaiian, not property ownership, but Native Hawaiian ties to Hawaii look like. And that's huge to us in a cultural perspective, but also in fulfillment of the act. So I think the more we're able to explain what the act does, we're actually seeing more positive responses. We get people coming in every day asking about when we can expect to see this money, how can they sign up for it. The number of calls have exponentially increased, and the number of requests for new applications has skyrocketed over the last month. So we know that there is definitely a demand for something like this.
Demand and interest. So that's really good. So, and when this bill had moved over from the House and the Senate, it was a little bit more not defined what that what that down payment might be, but I think it's already moved over to the Senate. And have they put a number to it?
Yeah, so the Senate, the House bill was a lot more flexible. I think it looked at the $600 million holistically and how it could move. The Senate bill, and rightfully so, challenged the idea of, well, if we really wanted to see where all of these dollars are going and ensure that it gets spent expeditiously and efficiently, how do we maybe in a more focused way direct the money? And so the amount on the Senate side, I think, is about $113 million for down payment assistance or mortgage assistance. And then it's about $487 million, give or take a few pennies, for infrastructure projects. And
so those infrastructure projects, let's talk about that a little bit, because when the bill was in the House, we learned, and we've known this, but I think it becomes more clear as you have to talk about it within the context of language in a bill. We know that infrastructure is a huge challenge for DHHL. So can you speak to a little bit to that and how some of those monies might actually be going to specific infrastructure projects now identified in not the Senate bill, the Senate draft of the House bill?
Sure. I think it's important to acknowledge that at the outset of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, not the best lands were given to the department or Native Hawaiians in general, right? Lands that were incredibly rural, that completely lacked infrastructure. And we have had 100 years to deliver on that, but it's still really costly. And so when we say that infrastructure costs a lot of money, we're talking about bringing water to rural areas. We're talking about bringing electricity and now broadband and sewer capacity. And, if there are no active developments in those areas, it becomes very hard for our county systems to be able to engage as well, because they don't have the resources to create a brand new, neighborhood out in these rural areas. And so the challenge is trying to figure out, how do we prioritize money? And there's just not enough to go around. That's true for all state departments. So it's not purely a DHHL issue, but at the end of the day, we're challenged with, well, we've got a small pot of money, which projects can it go to? Oftentimes it's, what's already in the pipeline of, well, we've got plans to go here. How do we build out Kapolei, for example, or maybe slightly less rural areas on Maui? And that's sort of how that process works. In terms of this bill, the projects that are listed in the Senate draft of the House bill, we expect that those units would come online with homes in bed over the course of the next 8 years, and would deliver up to 2,900 new units. Just for perspective, right now our 5-year projection is only 1,500 units. Some years, just based on funding, we're only able to deliver several hundred units. So close to 3,000 units in 8 years. That's monumental. So
this really does put a dent in what you are able to offer. And I really encourage folks to visit capital.hawaii.gov to look up House Bill 2511, because what the Senate did was they challenged you. They challenged you guys to come up with some infrastructure projects. You have infrastructure projects on all islands here, Maui, Kauai, Big Island, Oahu. You want to speak to any of these that are moving, that you think are going to be moving quickly?
Yeah, I think there are projects that are obviously a little smaller but could use the funding. We haven't done a lot of things on some of the neighbor islands. Kauai's got some projects in there. Hawaii Island has a few things both east and west. And so I think being able to make sure that this money is spread evenly across the state is, one, incredibly important. But two, I think it actually facilitates a stronger discussion on what affordable housing looks like for our state's future outside of the urban core of Honolulu, because we have to accept that land is a limited and finite resource on Oahu, and at a certain point, we're just not going to be able to fit everyone in, Kaka'ako or
Yes.
Honolulu, which is why Kapolei is actually one of the biggest areas for development in that Senate draft, because we've still got a lot of land out there. It's already mostly developed. It's got a lot of infrastructure already in place, which makes the costs a little lower because we've already got experience doing all of that out there.
And something I think people forget is that this is but one bill in many bills. So we're looking at bills about important ag lands, about transit-oriented development. So all of this also folds into some of that as well, because Kapolei is an essential part of the transit-oriented development scene. Let me ask you about one more bill. So, what some folks don't realize sometimes outside of the legislature is that we have bills kind of moving in tandem. So when we crossed over our House Bill 2511 to the Senate, they crossed over their Senate Bill 3247 to us that also had to do with Department of Hawaiian Homelands. And in this, we're asking you to develop a strategic plan to meet applicant preferences for single-family homes or rent-to-own single-family homes, duplexes, apartments, or townhouses. Can you tell us a little bit about what you already have in your planning process for these different types of home ownership models?
Sure. So we've got a pretty well-developed planning process in place already that we've really built out over the last 30 years that looks at planning in scales, right? So there's the general plan, which is a 20-year horizon of how we expect the department to move. And then we have our island plans, which sort of set up the land use designations on that island, how we expect each parcel to be used. And that's done through beneficiary consultation and input. And then we get really specific on the regional level. And so the projects that we do generally are falling within the scope of both the island and the general plans. And so the request to have us prepare a strategic plan should be informed from that. We're actually in the middle of updating the general plan. We're hitting about the 20-year mark. And so hopefully the information that we've gathered from the general planning process and also our 2020 beneficiary study should be sufficient to help us build out a reasonable plan for how to spend $600 million.
Okay. So what do you think is going to be the biggest obstacle? I mean, I think, you've got both House and Senate in concept agreeing to this strategic investment. For you, boots on the ground, what do you think is going to be some of your biggest challenges?
I think it's really going to come down to the contracting. There are only so many contractors who can build homes and at this scale. We've got a mix of TOD, right? In the Kapolei proposal, there's some TOD projects. So there's only even fewer developers who can do, TOD and traditional single-family homes. And so I think, there's a couple other issues, right? We know that water is incredibly...
and that's going to be affecting development across the board on Oahu, right?
And so I think we need to plan for that as well. So I think getting the money out, just in terms of getting qualified applicants with ideal bids, and then being able to do that in the scope of what potential water resource limitations there could be over the next few years, I think those would be the biggest challenges.
So in addition to this big strategic investment that both House and Senate want to do, there's always little bills running around having to deal with DHHL. Talk to me about what this maintenance of infrastructure, county maintenance of infrastructure bill, Senate Bill 879.
Sure. So the department has built out sewers and water lines all over the state for its homesteads. There are some homesteads with very, very old infrastructure. I'm talking Papakolea, Waimanai, Waimanalo. And the department has spent a lot of money keeping or maintaining those systems, which are incredibly costly. That money could be used for developing housing, but instead we're using it to repair sewer. At the same time, our beneficiaries are paying their county taxes, which means they should have sewer service and water service maintained by the counties. And so this bill sort of fixes, I think, a better statewide strategy to ensure cooperation between the counties and the department in getting our infrastructure up to code, because the older ones may no longer be up to code. So getting it up to code and then getting it transferred to the county system so that that responsibility can be shared. And then ideally freeing up resources at DHHL that we can then put towards new development.
And like you said, it's a fairness issue, right? If individuals are paying county taxes, then they should also be getting the services.
And I've got some staff who would appreciate not doing the late night sewer calls, so that would be nice for them as well.
So tell me how important, like GET exemptions, what does that mean to DHL? What is this bill, Senate Bill 1121, GET exemption for all gross proceeds?
I think this actually speaks to a larger issue in that many times DHHL is treated like a private developer. And I think we need to be more consistent in that, one, we're not. Two, we're a very unique state entity, right? We've originated out of a federal act. We have a public trust responsibility. The GET exemption would free up millions of dollars that are paid out every year in taxes for, what is a very different purpose, right? We're not the traditional developer. We're not building homes for profit. We're building homes to help the state fulfill its compact that it made with the federal government as a condition of statehood. So that would save the trust money in order to help us put money towards other resources. So this is an example of, that was part of our package. That's an example of the department trying to think creatively about, okay, if there's not enough money to go around to raise, how do we cut on costs where, it's efficient to do so? And we thought that was one of those ways.
And this one seems to also be moving quickly too. Okay, talk to me about this one, because this one might be a little bit harder for people to understand. Prohibiting lessees who sell or transfer their interest in Hawaiian homelands from being placed on the waiting list. This is Senate Bill 2623 moving.
So that's not in the department's package, but what that bill proposes is to address a I don't want to call it a loophole, but an opportunity for beneficiaries who sell their lease once they're on Hawaiian homelands or transfer it. We've had instances where beneficiaries have then reapplied, gone back to the bottom of the wait list, and have bought off again, right? Because as a beneficiary, you could technically not wait. If someone is willing to sell you their property, you could just buy it, and then you don't have to wait. And so while it's not an incredibly rampant problem, there are circumstances where folks figured out that they could buy multiple times. This is the state's first step towards trying to limit that. It does require congressional approval, so it's got quite a bit of red tape it's got to get through at all levels, leading all the way up to Congress itself. But it does seek to address a really unique issue.
Well, and then also, I think it speaks to fairness as well, because you want to make sure that everyone who is on the wait list has waited in line, and there's people joining the wait list, right? And so you don't want to necessarily step in front of them if they've never had an opportunity.
That's right. I think we talk about it oftentimes in bites at the apple, and these are beneficiaries who have had one, sometimes two, sometimes 3 bites, and we've got to think about the people who have been on the wait list for decades and have never had a single bite, right?
Yeah. So tell me, this is kind of creative. Like, I saw this bill and I'm like, geothermal resources on Hawaiian homelands. Senate Bill 3195. What is that about, and what are you folks hoping to seek with this bill?
So that one's also not in our package, but we've supported it. And that bill is seeking money from the legislature to basically explore the opportunity for geothermal resource development on Hawaiian homelands for a couple of reasons. There's an opinion that says that geothermal resources originating on Hawaiian homelands are for Department of Hawaiian Homelands, which in and of itself could be a really strong economic resource if done correctly and if it's actually there. We've never done substantive studies to know whether or not we have resources on our lands, so this money would allow us to sort of explore that. But I think more importantly, it brings Native Hawaiians into an ongoing discussion that's actually happening in Indian community in the continental United States about energy independence, what energy sovereignty looks like, and how Native people can be in the driver's seat of their economic futures simply by looking at their energy generation resources and capitalizing on that.
So knowing that you have lands on Hawaii Island, clearly that would be the place where you guys are going to be doing the study, right?
I think so. That's probably makes the most sense. There are some known areas on other islands. Obviously,
really?
The further west you get, the smaller those chances get. We did some water work looking at water wells a few years ago that sort of gave us an indication of where we think there might be geothermal activity. And so, yeah, we'd probably focus primarily on the eastern islands because we already know that there's a good amount of activity there.
Well, I know that there was some interest, and I think I haven't delved too much into this, but like in New Zealand, right? They have very active development of geothermal resources, and that is a way for us to get to energy independence, as well as to put Native Hawaiians in the driver's seat, like you said. So is that kind of some of the modeling that you guys might be doing?
Absolutely.
Okay. We've got a few more minutes to go, so it's an exciting time for you. It's also a time of transition because there will be a new governor. What happens at the Department of Hawaiian Homelands? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but every department and agency must be thinking about this. Like, you have this huge opportunity to shape a program. What does the transition look like?
The transition will basically kick off in December, right? So when Governor Ige's term ends, that's when mine and the chairman's term ends in December. And so right now we're trying to make sure that things are in place to ensure continuity of government services, which is what all department agencies are thinking about. But we are in this very unique position of, in this year alone, or the last 2 years because of the pandemic, we have successfully managed to impress upon people the need for money at the department, and as a result, we've seen a lot of interest. It's not just the $600 million that you folks are contemplating. $200 million were inserted into the federal infrastructure bill, and
for broadband.
That's no, just for infrastructure.
Okay.
And while that remains to be passed, that demonstrates sort of a renewed sense of faith in the department's ability to deliver both at the state and federal levels. We've got about 90 million coming in broadband dollars. And so the transition really needs to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for the next administration to pick everything up and keep running. Because I think what we don't want to see are any balls dropped. We don't want to see any money lapsing. And we want to see that all of the things that this administration believes we could deliver with this money is actually delivered upon.
Well, it's been really fascinating to watch this bill and this initiative move through, because I think everyone is wanting this to succeed, and everyone is recognizing the importance of this moment in time to make a strategic investment. And I know I've also heard you say publicly, like, we could actually be making this investment like on an annual basis. No one can know what the future holds, but what is your one hope in this last minute or so for the department in reaching its goals with this investment?
Well, this year actually marks the 100th anniversary of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. And so when we look at the last 100 years, my hope for the next 100, not just the next administration, is, continued delivery at or above the rate that we're doing it now. And the sort of unfortunate thing is DHHL really didn't hit its stride in development until the 80s or 90s, already 60 to 70 years into the act. And so, it would be incredible to see what more we could do developing at this pace for a full 100 years.
Well, I love the energy, Tyler, coming from you, and I know that Chair Ila is working his working his heart and soul into this measure as well. We have maybe 3 weeks of conference signing die. We're done on May 5th. So I really, really hope that we'll be sitting here together and looking at some historic legislation, because I think this is a moment in time. And I'm so glad that you're here with us on this journey and helping us shape the policy, like you said, not just for the next year, but for the next 100 years.